think it's through the process of osmosis. We've inflicted the same on our 4 children, and now my eldest daughter's going to all the best exhibitions in London. My younger son is going to photographic exhibitions, and funny enough, they curse you at the time, but they thank you later.
Yeah, that is quite interesting, isn't it? Because we have the same in our family. I always complain that my children have become film directors and singers, but you can't help it if your parents drag you around. And so are you happy the way these kids have gone? And
Yes, I always wanted, in a funny way, I always wanted my children to be creative. I think there's something very good for the soul to make things. So I always encourage my children, whereas I went to a school, and when I was leaving school, if you were bright, you became a lawyer or an accountant. You were pushed into that. Medicine was beyond my school. And if you were rather thick, you became an estate agent. And so that's how, these were professions. The professions were pushing me. At no time when I left school in 1980 did somebody suggest I should make something or go into manufacturing, which was an enormous shame. And my 2 sons are brewers. They own 3 restaurants. My eldest daughter, lives a very urbane life in Notting Hill in London, and she's an interior designer who works for a very fierce lady who is delightful. And I said, could you describe this Samantha Todd Hunter to me, to my daughter? And my daughter said, you know, Absolutely Fabulous, the programme. Well, she's like one of those. And I said, well, how can you qualify that? And she said, yes. She has 2 small dogs, and they're named Napoleon and Josephine. So you get a measure of the lady by the names of her dogs.
so did you study antiques? Did you have to learn about it? Or is it kind of rigged and it's produced there and you're given notes to when you value these things and or when you go on your trips?
Yes, I think the lovely old system that the fine art world in London had, however smart it was, Sotheby's or Christie's, you would find the sons of earls or the sons of dukes had to lift furniture for about a year. And we had a sort of an apprentice system within the fine art world. And if you're a glamorous looking girl, you'd be on reception, and you'd start on reception. And if you're a boy, you'd be lugging furniture, or maybe you were hanging pictures. And you did that for about a year, and you got to know everybody within the organisation. And then after that year or 2 years, you'd say, oh, I really fancy going into Oriental ceramics, or I really love Impressionist pictures. I want to go into 20th century art or something like that. And then with the London rooms, you started specialising. But I didn't do that route in a funny way. I went to a very good regional auctioneer in Sussex, in the county town of Lewes. It was a very busy auction room. We used to sell about 2,000 lots every 6 weeks, and some of them were very highly priced. I remember we sold a collection of gold and enamel Swiss boxes that were given as gifts by monarchs and the wealthy years ago, which was an amazing experience. But I handled so much. So I started portering. I always tell people I spent the first 5 years of my life walking backwards, because the head porter liked, obviously, to walk forwards. So I was at the other end of the table or card table, whatever it was, and I was always walking backwards. So to this day, I can walk backwards very well. So it's held me in great stead filming, in fact, because they always like these sort of walking, talking shots. And most people manage to fall over a wire or a camera lead, but I can walk as well backwards as I can forwards.
And do you value? I mean, are you obviously you must be able, having been through an auctioneer's, to be able to value bits of furniture. Do you walk into people's houses and say, that's priceless, that's rubbish? Are you ever tempted?
Yes, you do it far more kindly. you focus on the good, and I think the great phrase is if it's something marginal and you know it's going to be a disaster as soon as you touch it, you always say keep it and enjoy it.
So remember that. Remember that.
So if somebody says to you that, because most auctioneers will want your most valuable items from your house, and I remember years ago doing the most horrendous call. I went with my head porter, who I'd walked backwards for 5 years. The auctioneer, the owner of the business, was so busy, he couldn't do it. And this chap, Miles Tucker, and I drove off to a very nice house in Tunbridge, which is near Tunbridge Wells. And we went into their sitting room, and they had a nice pair of Meissen figural candlesticks with sort of 2 branches and a sort of pink and turquoise and greeny sort of figural stem. And the head porter, Miles, said, I think they're Meissen to the people. May I just check and look underneath and see if there's a cross swords mark? Anyway, he went, this was the opening gambit, he went over, picked them up, turned them over, and of course forgot to hold the candle branches, which promptly fell out and smashed on the stone fireplace. So I've always learned actually to hold things correctly, and it's one of the most embarrassing moments where you have to sort of apologise your way out of somebody's house. I've forgotten the question now. I'm rambling on.
No, that's fine.
I know
Please ramble.
Sheehan is the great talker.
Please ramble. We want to hear. How did you get out of the Meissen scrape?
Sorry?
When you dropped the when your
Yeah.
colleague dropped the Meissen.
Luckily it wasn't me, and I felt terribly sorry for Miles.
Did you have to pay?
Sorry? Yes, our boss did, and the lady quite rightly got on the phone to my boss Philip Taylor and gave him a right old roasting, and I think things calmed after her demand was doubled with a cheque. Always with people and pieces, collectors are funny people. I remember once, when I went through the process, so I spent 9 years at my first job. In those 9 years, I studied in the evening, and I did part-time. I studied for my chartered surveyors, and chartered surveyors had most chartered surveyors, of course, are commercial surveyors who value property leaseholds, how much they're going to get from a government rental and all that. But there are very small little divisions within the chartered surveyors, one of which is rather fabulous, which is mineral surveyors. So they're the sort of people who would have gone to Burma and found rubies, and come to Sri Lanka and found lovely precious stones in Ratnapur and places like that. But also there was a funny group called Plant and Machinery, and also there was a fine art section. And I did the fine art section, and of course for the first year I had to study what everybody else had to study. We had to do contract law, tort, valuations, economics, and all those various things. And it was only when you did part 2s that you started studying glass and oriental ceramics and furniture. And because I only went on Thursdays down to Southampton, I had a very nice friend, Fiona Campbell, whose father was an eminent auctioneer in Scarborough, on the east coast of Yorkshire. And she used to give me all her notes. And I lived in Brighton at the time, and there was a very smart sweet shop, and she loved toffees. So every 2 weeks, I used to bring
A supply of toffees.
I used to bring her toffees, which worked very well. I would have loved a kiss, but I had to settle for toffees.
Tell me about the value of these things. Do antiques go in and out of fashion? Do things go down in value and then come back up at different times?
And you know, like fashion itself, as the media gets quicker and quicker, fashion gets faster and faster and faster. And I do feel terribly sorry, and we have a very eminent fashion designer here. I always think they are the most hard-working people. I know my daughter did fashion design at Leeds College of Art, and while all her friends in her house were studying history of art or English or whatever, they did about 3 lectures a week. My daughter was in the studio from 8 o'clock in the morning until about 7 o'clock at night, about 6 days a week. So incredibly hard work, and it's hard work because you have to keep up. And also with the antiques world, you know, fashion changes very quickly.
Give us an example of what has sort of been considered valuable and has come down, or the other.
I think, you know, the amazing thing, when I studied fine art, I went to I did a year, so I did better than expected with my A-levels. And I cheekily asked my father whether I could have a year off because I couldn't apply for university. And he said, James, you spent the last 5 years doing very little. You can go and study something. So I went to a lovely place called the Inchbald School of Design, which is off a very famous, 2 famous squares, Sloane Square and Eaton Square. And it was named after Michael Inchbald, and it was run by a very fierce lady called Jacqueline Thwaites, who was very exacting. And I had the most fabulous time. I was one of 2 men in our class. The other man was a retired banker from New York, who after lunch always fell asleep during the slideshow. And he was only stay awake. We had this very glamorous lady from Spinks who used to come, and it was funny, Jacqueline Thwaites and Michael Inchbald, they didn't really have staff. They just paid all their mates to come along and give lectures. And we had this very glamorous lady from Spinks who used to, was an Oriental dealer, ceramics and lacquerware and things like that. And this lovely man would try and stay awake desperately for her lecture and would always volunteer to do the slide projector, but inevitably he drifted off after about the 3rd slide. So I was there with about 14 lovely ladies, fresh from school, the age of 18, and I had 14 lovely ladies who came from all the best girls' schools in England, who were filling another year before their inevitable marriage or going off to work for Bladen Lines or Super Travel, catering somewhere. And we had the most fabulous time.
I can imagine.
It was
you
great
needn't
fun.
go there. You needn't go there. I can imagine. Now, tell me about Sri Lanka. You have connections to Sri Lanka. You come here fairly often. Have you ever looked at Sri Lankan antiques and thought to value them, or are there problems? I mean, are there many fakes here? What is your take?
No, when I was in Kandy, I went to a lovely antique shop run by, sadly, the husband had died, who used to deal with the Andachis, and he was a very good dealer, but regrettably, he'd lost his hearing and was run over by a train. So they were absolutely distraught. And I dealt with the widow and the daughter had been to England, had very good English, and I bought some fabulous silver filigree bracelets, and the ladies told me they had been worn by Candian princesses, of course.
They always are.
So we fell for it hook, line and sinker, but always, when I come to Sri Lanka, I'm always looking for exotic woods like Lignum vitae, the heaviest wood in the world, and I bought some fabulous stupas that were turned in Lignum vitae, and of course everybody wants to buy a Tara, don't they? A fabulous gilded bronze from Sri Lanka, and I've yet to find one. But the the one that I'm sure the British Museum will give back to Sri Lanka one day stands looking over the Asian galleries, which is Neil McGregor quoted it as one of the 100 most important items in the world, and it was found buried near Trincomalee, and it's Tara, and she comes from about 700 AD. An incredible, almost life size of this idealized woman.
And easily one of the most beautiful things ever created in the world.
Yeah, and acknowledged so, which is amazing, really interesting. I would love to find a smaller Tara somewhere.
So are you more into kind of statues and smaller things, or do you also do furniture? Do you look at furniture and value furniture? Because the reason I ask is we almost had the idea of asking people to bring in odd bits of things, put you on the spot. Luckily, nobody had. But is it
somebody will have something in their pocket? Don't worry. I'm a terrible collector, and my wife, my poor father died recently, and we've been having such fun going through his items, and he kept bizarre things like an expenses receipt for my 21st birthday, and my children have always teased me for being like Elton John. Not that I throw tantrums, but sometimes I can be slightly selfish, and it was very funny because I read the expenses and it had wine and alcohol, £248. This was in what was it, 1981.
My goodness.
And then flowers were 255. So it just confirmed what my children thought. You know, there's Elton John spending more on flowers than drink.
Now, suddenly mid-career, you decide that you want to be a writer. What prompted that? Or was it something you always knew?
No, I've always worked quite hard during my life. So I've had so over COVID, we had a family pub, and I converted it to a grocery store, which I loved, and a huge respect for all grocers after doing it for 2 years. And I've really enjoyed that process. We've had restaurants. I always, as a child, wanted to have a restaurant, and we finally did it by buying a coaching inn. And it was my children's university, and we all cooked, and we all had the most terrible arguments at home about it. And to this day, my wife hates it, but I love it. But I wanted to do something that I could do until I went doolally or died. And I thought, writing, I can do that. I can sit down and write. All I need to do is look after my brain, and hopefully I'll be able to write. And I started it, and the catalyst was, we had a bronze in our garden. I love my garden, my wife loves her garden, and I'm in charge of sort of hardscaping, and I do all this sort of brick and flint work. And we bought this bronze, which wasn't very valuable. I think we paid £600 for it. It was a copy cast in the Philippines or China, imported during the 1980s when metals were far cheaper, and we bought it at auction. And it's a big thing. It's sort of quarter size of a real jockey, racehorse with jockey up. And I made this sarcophagus-shaped plinth that we were going to put it on, and I'd always hidden this bronze for about 2 years somewhere. And I was going to finish the plinth, and I thought, right, the gardener's coming on Wednesday, so he and I will move it. And then when the children come at the weekend, we'll lift it onto, because it's very heavy, we'll lift it up. Anyway, between putting it there on Wednesday and the children coming up on a Friday, some very nice traveller came down our drive and it disappeared from the palace I'd put it on.
Oh no.
So I said to a friend, I said, when you're going around the auction rooms, or if you see a similar one, I never thought it would be recovered. If you see a similar one, would you let me know? And then anyway, he gives me a call 6 weeks later, and he's in a local auction room, and he said, James, I think I found a similar one. I said, oh, marvellous, what are they estimated at? And he told me the estimate. I said, would you take some photographs of it? He took some photographs, and I replied, I said, I think it's mine. So, had exactly the same discoloration. So, we get it back. We had the most delightful policeman who came over, who was terribly earnest, and Oscar Wilde wrote about the importance of being earnest. And for an earnest person is never humorous, but for those they meet, they're very funny. And so I had all these sort of things, and my eldest daughter said, I kept on banging on about it. She said, oh, for goodness sake, why don't you write about it? So I started writing. It was a lot smaller when I started, and then when I sent it to the printer, I can thank Ashok here for getting me over the line, because he kindly invited me to this literary festival, to lovely Sri Lanka, as the emails started coming to and fro, more people got involved, and then I started seeing the branded logo, and very kindly HSBC was sponsoring it, and I thought, my goodness, this is a bigger affair than I thought. And I thought it would be totally fraudulent for me to come to a literary festival. And Ashok kept on saying, oh, don't worry, James, you don't have to have a book, just whittle on about, BBC and antiques. And I thought, no, I can't. I've got to bring a book. So this only came back from the printers on Friday, and I hopped on the plane. Thank you.
Here you have it. Its title is Bharti, A Tale of a Stolen Bronze. And I didn't realize till just now that is absolutely from real life, your bronze.
It is, yeah. I think all good stories have a kernel in truth, don't they? I love,
absolutely.
I much respect to William Dalrymple and people like that who have to historically fact check. You see, I'm a man who's always survived on flannel. I'm a salesman. So for me to do lots of research would be slightly abhorrent. So I love the genre of fiction.
Fiction, that's it. You just write what you want.
You can, yeah.
But did you find it easy? Because now, I mean, as you say, this book has just come out, but it's been in the making for a while. Do you find that process of writing easy? I mean, Sir David Hare, who's in the audience, said, be kind to him. He's a literary virgin, he said, or literary festival virgin, so don't be too hard on him. Do you find that whole thing about writing, the process of writing, a difficult one, or does it come very naturally to you?
I tell you what always has been my huge aid in life is how I got my exams and things like that. My housemaster said to me, because I wasn't the most proficient of students, he said, James, if you're going to work where you can be seen, work in a library. So I never studied at school in my study, I always studied in the library. And it was amazing how suddenly your teachers they started saying, oh, James is always in the library. He must be terribly studious and hardworking. Anyway, life is about perception. So, and then when I studied for my Charles Surveyors, I went to Lewis Library, and I used to go from work at 5, and they closed at 7, and I just kept to that, and that was enough. And then I've written most of my books in Sri Lanka, and I've carved out those horrible months in England, January and February, which are very dull, the concept of rain here is probably you have much rain in a short period. We have much rain now in a long period, and it's terribly cold, and I found out it's a lot cheaper to shut up my house, come to Sri Lanka. My wife loves the sun. She's like a reptile. She like nothing better than being on a hot stone. And I hate the sun, so it's fine by me. I'm in the shade, and I sit down, I get up early. I love getting up early. So I get up early, I'll write, and then I'll have a swim, and then I'll write, and then my wife will join me for breakfast. And the routine of that, I really enjoy, and I love the writing. And after about 10 days, you move into that world, you know, and everything, your normal world, disappears, and you live vicariously through your characters.
And of course, you just told me earlier on that you love this world of writing. Is it quite a new thing for you? I mean, what have you been writing for many years now? Or?
I didn't realise it was so glamorous, you know. I thought only
That's thanks to you lot.
Yeah, quite. I thought only rock stars went to festivals, but it appears that there's a whole world I never knew was out there. And I've been chatting to all these various authors, and they're sort of giving me tips where the best festivals are.
Yeah. And it's a very relatively new thing. It's only in the last kind of 10, 15 years, I guess. You've got this whole subculture of not only books, but writers.
Yeah.
So welcome to that world.
And I've met one man here, he will remain nameless, who wrote his last book when he was 26. He's now 40, and he just goes from festival to festival.
Ah, yes, I know who it is. I shan't mention names. But you know, you have a good time. The food is there, the booze is there. What's not to like?
It's great, enormous fun, and I do love Sri Lanka. I think.
And sorry, I just wanted to say, this is the first part of a trilogy, am I right?
Yes.
Which is in the making, and it's a rip-roaring tale. It's a sort of adventure story, a boy's own tale. Lovely, absolutely lovely reading it.
Good, thank you. And what I've done, I had the very good fortune when I did my English A-level, and I was taught it was a small school, so I was taught English A-level by our headmaster. I don't think headmasters now teach in class anymore, but we studied two books that have almost remained my favourite to this day. And one was Charles Dickens' Bleak House, and I love Dickens. I love it for the multi-layered characters. You know, how there's so many characters and they all interact with each other, they bump into each other. I love that. I love the complexity of that. And the other book was, of course, the very polished, glamorous Scott Fitzgerald. And I studied Great Gatsby. And, you know, who will ever forget, you know, the great portrayal by Robert Redford and Mia Farrow as Great Gatsby, and then latterly, of course, Leonardo DiCaprio. And what a fabulous book! And that introduced me to American literature. I love reading. I think every writer needs to read, don't they?
Absolutely, and that's, I think, the secret to it all. Time now for questions. Anybody would like to? There's one right here. If we can get a mic to Artika, please.
I think we'll do it through the power of mime until you get the microphone, madam.